Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another edition of Budget Magic. So this week, we are heading to Legacy to play a deck that is sort of funny, but it's actually super powerful. I had so much success playing this deck this week. It's actually just a very strong deck. I'm calling this deck Jeskai Flying Men, and it's essentially a flying tribal deck. It's a very aggressive deck, very aggressive flyers, hard for our opponent to block. So we're looking to just play a bunch of good threats, hopefully with some additional upside, and fly over and kill our opponent before they get a chance to recover. As you can see, $92 in the paper world, only 25 ticks on Magic Online, so an amazingly cheap price for a really competitive Modern deck. A quick reminder before we get to the deck: if you enjoy Budget Magic and you enjoy this Jeskai Flying Men deck, it would be amazing of you if you could take a minute, click that subscribe button down in the corner of your screen. It's a great way to support the channel and the site for free. So let's talk Jeskai Flying Men. So first off, why is this deck called Flying Men? Well, a long time ago, back in the early days of Magic, Wizards printed this card that was 1 blue mana for a 1/1 flyer, and the name of that card was Flying Men. So our deck is essentially built on the modern upgraded versions of Flying Men. We're playing 8 Flying Men in Judge's Familiar and Maelstrom Wanderer. So these are just 1/1 flyers for 1, but they have an upside. We can sack them to counter an instant or sorcery unless its controller plays a single mana. So while these might not look great, and actually they are pretty good, they block random flyers like Vault Scourge and Inkmoth Nexus, their upside is actually really immense. There's so many decks in Modern that are looking to tap out for Become Immense to win the game, are looking to just throw a flurry of spells, to get to 5 mana and cast an Ad Nauseam, to Sylvan Scrying on turn 2 to set up Tron. They're good against such a huge percentage of decks, so we play these on turn 1, hopefully start beating down with them, killing our opponent, diminishing their life total, and then when we get the opportunity, we can counter one of our opponent's things, or better yet, our opponent, since it's sitting out there, often won't let us counter their things. So if we play a turn 1 Judge's Familiar, some decks just spend the entire game playing off curve, so we can't counter their stuff. So instead of Sylvan Scrying on turn 2 to set up Tron, they're waiting till turn 3, which is taking them longer. Instead of going off on turn 5 with Ad Nauseam, they gotta wait till turn 6, which gives us more time to kill our opponent. So these cards are actually super powerful in Modern, and with 8 of them, we almost always have one. And then, as far as the 2-drops, these are kind of our big hitters that help us close out the game. Pride of the Clouds might look horrible, but it's like the Flying Tarmogoyf. It's only 2 mana, it's a 1/1, but it gets +1/+1 for each other creature with flying in play, and this counts our opponent's creatures too, which is really random. If our opponent has a flyer, it pumps up our Pride of the Clouds, but this card just gets super huge. If we can play a 1-drop flyer on turn 1, Pride of Clouds on turn 2, we're likely going to be attacking on turn 3 after playing another flyer, even 2, for 5 in the air maybe. And if we have double Pride of Clouds, our nut draw can be like 1-drop Pride of Clouds plus 1-drop, and we just get like a turn 4 kill because we have these huge flyers and our opponent can't do anything about it. It also has another ability in Forecast where you can pay 2 a 1 in a blue on your upkeep. You reveal Pride of Clouds in your hand to make a 1/1 flyer. Most of the time we're playing Pride of Clouds as a big beater, but occasionally if the game goes really long, we're flooded out, it's a long controlling matchup, we can use this as like a really slow, really mana intensive Lingering Souls. For 12 mana over 3 turns, we can make a bunch of 1/1 flyers and pump them up with our favorable wins. So one of the big reasons to be flying tribal is we get an awesome Anthem effect. Only 2 mana, which is key, and it just gives all of our creatures +1/+1. And that might not look like much. It works really well with our Mausoleum Wanderer, which counters a instant or sorcery unless the opponent plays amount of mana equal to its power, so we can use that almost like a weird spell pierce essentially if we have a favorable wins down, but it just pumps up all of our stuff, which helps us close out the game even faster with our late game plays. And by late game I mean turn 3 or 4. So Spell Queller is one of the key cards in our deck. It works super well with favorable wins because one of the biggest downsides of Spell Queller in Modern is it dies to Lightning Bolt, dies to Lightning Helix, so it's not necessarily going to sit around, but when we play a turn 2 favorable winds into Spell Queller, our Spell Queller is a 3/4, so it dodges all of that removal, makes it much, much harder for many decks to kill, makes it more like a hard counter, plus it's just a reasonable flying threat. Like, it's a good flash flying body all by itself. So Spell Queller is really key. When I was making the deck, I at first thought, well, I probably need a counter, maybe I'll play Remand or Mana Leak. Then I realized it's pretty silly to play Flying Tribal and leave out a Mana Leak on a body that has flying. So I switched to Spell Queller at the last minute, and I'm really glad I did, because the card is super powerful in this deck. And then for closing out the game, just like we have 8 Flying Men, we essentially have 8 Mantis Riders, or 8 Lightning Angels. So these cards don't do anything tricky. They're not countering spells, they're not forecasting, they are just huge beaters, work amazingly well with favorable winds, makes them 4 power and 4 or 5 toughness, so they're dodging lightning bolts again, and they just close out the game really fast. These cards are very close to the same cards. Lightning Angel is 1 more mana, 1 more toughness, but they are flyers that have flying, vigilance, and haste, so we get to play them, start hitting our opponent right away for big chunks of damage, at least 3, sometimes 4 with a favorable wins, and we have them back on defense. So not only are we getting in this damage, they're also back to block our opponent's stuff. And as 3 power, 3 toughness, or 4 toughness creatures, they're actually pretty reasonable blockers. They're not just going to get run over by anything. If you look at the cards played in the format, 3/4s and 3/3s actually match up pretty well. So we're getting them for this damage in the air. Our opponent likely can't block it, and we have these threats back on defense. So this is how we really close out the game. Also, players don't really expect it. When they see our 1-drops, they see our Pride of Clouds, maybe we Spell Queller or something, they're probably calculating this math in their head of, okay, I can take this much damage and still be okay, and then I'll attack like this to get our opponent's life total down to that. But these cards throw off that math, because it just makes it so our opponent's never safe. They might feel safe and think they have the game all figured out, and then all of a sudden, oh, there's a Lightning Angel. 3 extra damage this turn. If you can't do anything about it, 3 more the next turn. There's a Mantis Rider. Same thing. So it throws off all this combo math and gets a lot of surprise wins, because opponents aren't expecting this flying, vigilance, haste flyer out of nowhere. As far as the rest of the main deck, the spells are pretty straightforward. 4 lightning bolts, kills our opponent's early game stuff, goes to the face in the late game. A single electrolyze, nice when we can get 2 1 toughness creatures, also can go to the face, draws us a card. And then 4 vapor snags to kind of go on the tempo plan. Get in for some damage, bounce something back to our opponent's hand, they lose life, get in some more damage with our flyers. Hopefully kind of just close out the game in that way. And then the mana base, not great, but we're making do with our budget duel. So 4 Mystic Monastery gives us all the colors of mana we need but come into play tapped. Shivan Reef and Battlefield Forge give us untapped duels. Of course, they're a little bit painful, so we got to make sure we're aggressive. Over the course of the long game, the damage of 8 pain lands is really going to add up. 4 Glacial Fortresses, and then a bunch of basics and a single Moorland Haunt, which allows us to make more flyers, pumps up our Pride of the Clouds, gives us chump blockers after we sacrifice one of our 1-drops to counter something. It does a lot of cool tricks in the deck. As far as the sideboard, is it Staticaster and Gut Shot, fight against aggressive decks, Fact, Affinity, anything with a lot of 1 toughness creatures, Negate and Dispel as counter spells to protect our stuff, disrupt our opponent, Vandal Blast and Wear Tear to fight against Affinity. Wear Tear is also helpful against any artifact or enchantment. Gets Ensnaring Bridge, Leyline of Sanctity, and so forth. Tormod's Crypt to fight against graveyards, and Crumble to Dust is primarily for Tron. So the basic idea of this deck is to curve out. That's what we're trying to do. We're not really a control deck. We're really an aggro deck with some tempo plays thrown in. But we're looking to 1-drop flyer into 2-drop flyer or favorable wins, into 3-drop flyer or leave up Spell Queller, into Lightning Angel, and that is a really, really fast curve. If we can get in enough damage with those creatures, then we can probably finish off the game with a Lightning Bolt, with a Vapor Snake, something like that. So I'm really excited about this deck. It's very powerful, and it seems to match up well with a lot of the big decks in the format. We have enough tricks that our opponent really doesn't know what's going on. We have some counters to fight against combo decks, and we have a really fast clock. It's definitely possible that when we get a good curve, we can just just kill our opponent on turn 4 or turn 5, which isn't the fastest clock in Modern, but it's fast enough to be competitive when it's backed up by Spell Quellers and Vapor Snags and just a little bit of disruption to keep our opponent from killing us on turn 4, because a lot of decks just don't have a way to deal with what we're doing. Flyers are not that popular in Modern, so it's essentially like every creature in our deck is unblockable in a really high percentage of matchups, so our opponent is kind of just fighting on a different level, and our deck has the advantage to, even though it might not be as expensive or as powerful on its face, we can take advantage of the fact that the format just isn't set up to fight against flyers and kind of exploit that loophole and win a lot of games that way. So anyway, that's Jeskai Flying Men for Modern, and that's our budget magic for this week. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoy the gameplay videos, and I will talk to you soon.